All right, Danny, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast, man.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is exciting. This is you've been on my podcast before. Joe's been on your podcast, right?
Yep, he has.
Now, okay, full circle. I'm here.
And I'll soon be on, or maybe by the time people are hearing this, be on your new podcast.
My business podcast. I
Yeah.
know.
Is it still new? How long have you had the PT Entrepreneur podcast?
I don't know what's considered new. I guess we've had it since August of last year. So almost a year.
Wow, time flies. Sometimes
Dude, we have 101 episodes now.
Oh, you're gaining speed on the Better Humanology podcast. That's crazy, man.
It's quick.
All right, so let's get started with some challenges and some recommendations before we hop into anything else. So, fitness challenge for everybody listening. Any kind of fitness challenge.
So, I'm actually headed to Connecticut to do a fitness challenge here in August, which is running up and down this hill in this guy's backyard 100 times. It sounds kind of silly, I guess, but it's apparently really steep hill, and it's a total of a little over 8 miles. And
there you go.
The person that's done it the fastest it's like a little over 2 hours, like
wow.
2 hours and 15 minutes. Yeah. My buddy that did it last year, it took him 3 hours, and he's pretty fit. So I've been doing a lot of hill runs recently, and I forget sometimes just how tough those are, but just beneficial. I mean, especially if you're sprinting up the hill and you're walking down, like it's sometimes a little tough if you're running down and your legs start to get a little wobbly, and it can be a little rough on the knees, but just like, man, here's what I learned this from Kelly Starrett. Like, he loves this sucker. He does heavy kettlebell swings, 10 to 15 heavy kettlebell swings, sprint up a hill as fast as you can, walk down until you can have like a 7-second exhale. The goal being by the time you get to the bottom of the hill, you have a 7-second exhale and then go again, and do that like 15 times.
Yeah. Amazing workout. So
it's super easy, right? Like, super simple.
I'm guessing this guy has a big backyard though, right? Like,
well, he's a billionaire, so yeah, he does have a big backyard. It's a weird thing. His name is Jesse Itzler, and his wife is Sarah Blakely, who owns Spanx. So there's this race called Hell on the Hill, and I somehow got like invited by a friend of his that's a friend of mine, and so I've been training for it. And I tell you, man, I just don't really know what to expect, because apparently it's a steep grass hill. It doesn't sound bad. It sounds actually like it's not that hard, but it told me 3 hours. I go, 3 hours? What the heck? It's a long time. So yeah, run up and down a hill in the middle of the day. Do it when it's hot.
That's hill runs are brutal, man. I know when we had some sprints in the program not long ago, being in Asheville now, plenty of hills to run around. I was like, I'm just going to do the sprints up the hill, just make it a little bit harder. I mean, a really steep hill. And I remember being like unbelievably sore for the next couple of days.
Yeah.
But I didn't know why. I was actually confused for a little bit. I was like, I shouldn't be sore. Like, we didn't do that much leg stuff. And it finally clicked. I was like, oh, it's because you're running up a hill, idiot. Like, that's, it's just a different stimulus. It's much, much harder than anything else.
Oh, totally. And if you think about it, if it's real steep, I mean, you're basically lunging up that hill
right.
in a sense, and your trail leg is just like, it's super eccentrically loaded through the Achilles. So like, it's challenging. I mean, I remember, being in the military and doing land navigation, or we would go and do like ruck marches and in land navigation courses, and going down pretty steep terrain that's uneven with a heavy gear on, and like, I mean, look, I was a physical therapist, so maybe I'm just a baby and I'm not used to that. They just stuck me in this infantry brigade, and I had to do some of this stuff with them, on a regular basis. But every time that we would, we go 8-10 miles or whatever, and you're going down as a pretty steep descent, man, that would just crush your quads. Like, my quads would just be so fatigued the next couple of days, just stopping me from falling down the hill,
That's awesome, dude. So I want to talk a little bit more about your background, but first, mental toughness challenge.
I'm a big fan of the cold exposure. So I do like that. I also like there's something that I do. I go to the pool a lot with my kids. It's summer, they love it. My daughters learn how to swim. My son, he's good now, so he's like not going to drown. But I constantly try to swim as far as I can underwater. And I know the limiter is not physical, it's
Yeah.
mental. And so I think that's a great way to test it. Like how can you override that like stimulus to take a breath? Cause you don't need to.
Dude, so I've actually worked with some special tactics guys on that before, like pool work,
Yeah.
a little bit of drown proofing type stuff,
Oh, ouch.
and nothing too aggressive. I didn't get too crazy with it, but this was like he's a lieutenant colonel, but he like is really into this stuff. Like he's
Yeah.
even like his kids aren't even that old, and he's like forcing them to like learn how to do underwater swimming and stuff. But it's so uncomfortable, like
Yeah.
because we'd have like goggles on, and he'd be like wouldn't let me come up, and like keep swimming, and like would know I'm like no, okay, now's real. He's like no, you still got at least another 20 meters in you. I'm like no, dude, I don't. It's terrifying. But
No, and isn't the standard? I think so. The guy that does our podcast audio, he'll listen. Oh, well, he won't listen to this actually. Johnny. So Johnny was a PJ, and I was talking to him about just like entry standards. I think the entry standard for that is just a 25-meter underwater swim. You have to be able to, the minimum, do that, right? I challenge you to go to your neighborhood pool and try to swim 25 meters underwater and see if you can actually do it. Like very few people can do that. It's not that they can't hold their breath long enough or they're just such inefficient swimmers. It's that you psych yourself out. You get like halfway, you're like, oh, I gotta breathe, it's totally different. When you do that. And I like that stuff. When there's another pool that we'll go to occasionally, it's my wife's mother's pool. So they have a deep end and no one is ever there. So sometimes I'll take like a weight and I'll go run around the bottom of the pool with it, or I'll work on like the drown proofing where you put your hands behind your back and then you just like bob, just blow all the air out till you hit the bottom and then you jump off the bottom.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah.
So I'll do that for, I don't know, 10 minutes. I just think it's like a cool exercise to do, to just be able to relax and then be able to explode and like time your breathing. But the water makes you realize quickly, you're in a different environment, man. It'll freak people out.
Yeah, it's funny how useless human beings are once they get in water. It just
Oh, totally. Here's what I think is interesting. We're just physically, we're pussies in general, and compared to other, compared to animals in general.
Oh yeah,
like
for sure.
But there's this interesting book, and I think I was chatting with you about it. *Sapiens*. Have you delved into that? Okay, because some of the stuff they talk about, I thought was really interesting. With that, and then there's another book I'm reading that's *Natural Born Heroes*, which is the same guy that wrote *Born to Run*, and he talks about this concept of the superpowers of the human body. So number one, we have giant brains, right? So we're super smart. We have small intestinal tracts because we can cook food compared to like, apes, which have to chew it. But what we have, which is really interesting, is a super, super springy joints, in particular in our hips and our shoulders. And what that lets us do is throw stuff, right? So like you and me cannot fight a gorilla, but we could sure as hell throw some rocks at it from far away and hopefully it'll decide to leave us alone.
Right.
So I think that the fastest a human being has ever been clocked at throwing something is well over 100 miles an hour. The fastest a chimp has ever been able to been taught to throw something is like 20 miles an hour. It's like our kids could throw faster than that. And it's because the shape of their joints is different. So we're like the world's best slingers of stuff. And it's the only way that we can, not be eaten by certain things.
So we're throwers and thinkers.
We're throwers, thinkers, and endurance runners. That's
it. For sure on the endurance. And that's, we are useless. Like, and we're like, my wife and I joke about it all the time because, we have a little dog, and so she's not a 3-legged dog. She has all of her legs, but occasionally she'll be scratching her fur. She has really long fur, and like her foot will get caught.
Oh, wow.
Like back foot will just get caught. Maybe like a tangle or something like that. And she doesn't care. She's just like, okay, I'm 3-legged now. Like we just have to, like, we notice her walking around on 3 legs and we're like, there's no like whining or like complaining. It's just like, oh, and that's what happens to dogs legitimately when they get like an injured leg or gets cut off. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm still super happy. I got 3 legs now, though. Whatever.
They just adapt. I mean,
right.
I have a patient that's a vet, and she said somebody brought a bobcat in the other day thinking it was a cat and wanted to get shots. And she said, she said they bring this bobcat in, and it's not a fully grown bobcat, but it's not a kitten anymore. And she's like, it's pacing back and forth on the table in the office, staring at her. And she said it was probably around like 10 pounds, which I don't know what a grown adult one gets, but it was smaller than a grown adult. But, she's telling me how she's trying to explain to these people that this is not a kitten. This is an actual bobcat. It's a wild animal, and that she's not going to inject it, and you need to let it go wherever you found it. And they just couldn't believe it. But she was telling me, like, just like the power that this little thing had, just like picking it up. She's like, it's so strong, like if as a full grown bobcat, she's like, it would ruin me if unless I had like some weapon or something like that. But yeah, we just don't have physical strength or speed or phenomenal vision. Like, yeah, we kind of suck aside from the three things we mentioned.
Yeah, like we can be impressed by athletes human to human basis, but we really do suck compared to animals. There are a lot of bobcats in Texas, and we used to live by the woods. I had more than one encounter with a bobcat. Luckily, they always let me go, but I'd get into like a staring competition. They'd be like 20 feet away.
Dang.
And I'm just like, are you going to like attack me, or are you going to walk away? And most of the time they're like, nah, screw it.
And they're really not that big, like compared to other animals.
But they're really strong, really fast, and like they get your throat or something, it's game over.
It's nuts, man. I mean, that's wild. Like if you think about, dude, we don't stand a chance. We don't have these sharp teeth. They instinctually go for the throat. Like even dogs. I mean, some of the military groups we work with, they have these really intense combat dogs, right? Like,
yeah,
attack dogs. And even seeing these like Belgian Malinois staring me down while I'm talking to their handlers. That happened to, I was at Fort Bragg with doing a military course. This was about maybe a year and a half ago. And we met some of the dog handlers for this one team. And this guy had his dog sit down while we were chatting the whole time. And this dog did not look away from me once. And I just thought to myself, like, if I like was on the receiving end of this dog trying to rip me apart, it would take my throat straight out of my body and then on to the next one. That's what they're born to do, man. And those Belgian Malinois, have you seen their mouths? Like,
oh yeah,
alligators. They said they call them alligators. It looks like it's bred with an alligator.
It's like unreal,
dog. Dude. It's a wild dog. If you've never seen a Belgian Malinois, go on Google Images and look up Belgian Malinois mouth, or something like that. I don't know. Be careful what you search for on Google Images, but you'll see. I mean, they have these huge mouths, and they're really scary.
All right, man. Let's get a book recommendation.
Book recommendation. I'm reading. I just finished reading, I should say, Tribe by Sebastian Junger.
Okay.
I thought that was a really interesting book. I'll leave it at that. Won't ruin it. It's short too. You could read it in like a weekend or a little trip. So I just finished it.
Yeah, I think I finished. I think I read that one a while back. No, it's a good book. All right, man. Well, let's hop into your background a little bit. What you're doing now, kind of the full of where you've come from and what you're doing now.
Sure. So currently, I own a physical therapy practice called Athletes Potential that's based in Atlanta, Georgia. I also work for a group called MobilityWOD, which was started by physical therapist / strength coach named Kelly Starrett. And I'm the tactical director for that group. So I teach all the military courses, which is kind of cool for me because my background is I went to PT school. So I got my doctoral degree from the University of Baylor, which is run actually by the Army. It's the Army's physical therapy program in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, the AMED Center there. So those of you that are familiar, that's where they train all the medics as well. And so I spent 7 years in the Army active duty as a physical therapist and bounced around to a couple different locations, a couple different assignments. While I was there, I got to do school in San Antonio. I was stationed at Schofield Barracks out in Hawaii with the 25th Infantry Division for 3 years, and then finished my military career or service, I should say, in Fort Benning, where I was at a troop medical clinic that was attached to the airborne school, which was actually a pretty cool assignment because I got to see some real kind of weird stuff. So I got out in 2014, in June of 2014, to open my my practice in Atlanta and to take this opportunity to teach for MobilityWOD to still work with tactical communities. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I've been really fortunate to work with almost every smaller, kind of more specialized military group in the US, as well as a handful internationally, and a ton of different conventional groups, as well as police, FBI, and local groups as well we fall under that tactical population. So, what we really do is just teach like self-treatment, injury prevention, and human performance optimization, and how those things intertwine in a lot of ways between when you're hurt and when you're really back to full training, and also just how to take care of yourself. We typically tell people it's, the goal is to preserve the human capital, especially in the military. We want people to be able to be fit enough to do their job. And also when they do leave their career in the military, to be able to still enjoy their body and not just have a bunch of cool stories and be totally broken.
Yeah, and I think that's really big for the military population, because most of them are very broken at the end of their career.
Yes.
And I mean, I want to ask you about airborne, because just for other people out there who may not know the difference. So, guys jumping out of airplanes a lot. What you see skydiving or halo jumps or whatever you want to call it, like is not that bad for your joints, to be honest, because especially if you're pretty good at it, you jump out, you skydive for a little bit, you pull your chute at the right time, and then you even have kind of like brakes. You can land softly if you're good at it, or if you're going tandem, attached to somebody, you can land. But static line jumping in the military, you run with your parachute, and they throw you out the airplane, your cord is pulled right away. And how fast those guys are coming to the ground, you should see the little hit and roll thing that they have to do if anyone is unfamiliar with airborne. But man, jacks people up.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that you've seen a lot of stuff as a physical therapist with hips, knees, all sorts of problems, back from that kind of stuff. What have you seen in that part of your career?
Well, it is a fast descent. So, they have these they have two different types of parachutes. Now, they were just introducing one that was square. I forget the name of it, some acronym. And then they have the circular ones. Supposedly the square ones were supposed to, be a little more safe or whatever. But the intent is for you to fall fast enough to not get shot, but slow enough to not die. So
Right.
There's a fine line there. And I guess the best way to describe it would, it would be equivalent to you jumping off of something maybe 8 feet tall and then hitting the ground and rolling out of it, assuming there's no wind maybe pushing you down or something. So sometimes there's wind that may push somebody down faster, or push them into something like a tree or a fence. So yeah, I've seen some weird stuff, man. You're talking about trauma that you don't usually see unless there's a car accident. I did see one guy, he broke his back. It was kind of weird. It actually, he was almost on the ground, and right as he was about to touch, a gust of wind basically pushed his parachute to the side, and it pulled him across the ground, and he hit his back right into this fence post. And he was actually wearing gear. Luckily, if he hadn't been wearing gear, if he'd been just jumped with his uniform on, he probably would have had a way worse injury. But he broke his back when it drug him across the ground, hits this pole, and it actually broke the plate in the body armor of his back.
Wow.
Yeah, and so he was in a spinal brace for a little while. Didn't have to have surgery or anything like that, luckily for him. But you see a lot of knee injuries. They teach the jump where you land you're supposed to land with your feet together, and they do that in a lot of ways because it limits a lot of the knee and ankle issues that we see. It's sort of like when somebody's power cleaning. This is probably a good example. When it starts to get kind of heavy, people start to get their feet super wide. Nothing positive happens when that happens. You're slow, you put your joints in really weird positions.
You're trying to cheat the movement. Yeah.
You're trying to cheat the movement, totally. So if you land like that out of, if you were to jump off of something 8 feet tall and you try to land like that, you'll tear your groin up, you'll hurt your knee. we'll see that the knee blow out a lot in that position because people will typically turn the foot out and then the knee is in this unlocked position with the ACL, PCL, and then there's a lot of laxity. It's kind of like, imagine if you were tubing on a lake, right? And somebody's pulling you and all of a sudden you get a bunch of slack in that rope. Well, eventually when that slack gets taken out, there's this moment of like whiplash that occurs to that person on the tube, right? Well, your ligaments in your knee in that open position, eventually the slack gets taken out of it quickly. And that's usually where we see these real traumatic tears from a bad landing position or jumping position. So a lot of lower extremity injuries. I mean, it's a pretty tough life if you're going to do that for a career.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of like jumping off, you even said 8 feet, like just think about jumping off of like maybe where your roof line is, depending on your house, not your house, jumping off your house, you die.
Yeah. Don't
But
jump off of my house.
it would yeah, be a lot of injury over time. One thing I wanted to bring up with you though is because I've heard you talk a lot about it in the past, just in previous conversations and stuff, is people working too much on the sagittal plane.
Yeah.
And not and getting injuries in really weird ways. Maybe first, let everyone know what the sagittal plane is, and how that happens in maybe typical CrossFit or barbell movements, and the way most people are doing things, and some ways to combat injuries that are, related to not training, like transverse and other ways that we can operate.
So I think that, okay, first of all, so there's 3 planes of movement, right? Imagine that your body was getting kind of cut into different pieces, right? So a sagittal plane would cut straight through you and would separate you from like right and left. Transverse or rotational plane would cut through your waist, and it would actually be more of twisting movements are associated with that. Frontal plane would actually go through the side of your shoulders, and it would cut you into like kind of front and back. So when we train sagittal plane, it's typically anything where we're pushing and pulling, or anything we're moving from like point A to point B, both forward and backward. So this would incorporate things like running, kettlebell swings, rowing, deadlifting, squatting, anything with a barbell, in most cases is going to be sagittal plane. Burpees, anything like that, push-ups, air squats, all that stuff is sagittal plane. Even pulling movements like a pull-up is considered sagittal plane. So what we tend to see is this overdevelopment of strength in the sagittal plane and a lack of control in most cases in the transverse and frontal plane. So what I mean by that is, if you can't, let's say you're on a bar, a heavy barbell, and you're deadlifting. For some of you, you're not 100%, actually almost all of you are not 100% symmetrical. Like you may have this dominance in your left stance leg because you played soccer. So you have a strong right hip flexor because that was your dominant kicking leg, but you have a strong left glute and hamstring because that was your predominant stance leg. So now when you pull on a bar, which demands symmetry, you don't have really 100% symmetry. So as you start to get heavy or very fatigued, these flaws will come out. So the ability to control rotation or control side bending is just as important. And these are things where we need to be strong in the rotational transverse plane or the frontal plane side to side. So most of what we see, usually like the ratio is going to be somewhere probably in the range of like 50 to 60% of what you train should really be sagittal plane. And then the other, 40 to 50% should be in these other 2 ranges of motion. It depends on your sport too. It could be even more than that. If you play baseball, you should be doing a ton of rotational movement compared to somebody that's a CrossFitter that's going to be doing a lot of sagittal plane. So, think things like single arm carries are great for frontal plane. We're training the opposite side that we're holding the bell. Payloft press variations for rotational control, chops and lifts, medicine ball throws where we're actually like working on the rotational plane, even just multi-directional things, just agility drills where you're doing plyometrics in multiple directions and moving your body like an athlete that trains a lot in these multiple directions versus just doing sagittal plane, because what you can get is you can become very highly trained, but not athletic. So there's a difference between highly athletic and highly trained. You want to be both. Highly athletic would be somebody that can pick up a skill fast, whatever that is, any sort of physical skill quickly, and has control of their joints. somebody that's highly trained is somebody that can, metabolically has good stamina or has really good strength. But then if you give that person a baseball, they look like a 4-year-old girl. Like
Yeah.
that's what we see with things like, that's why I don't have the softball toss in CrossFit anymore.
Right. Because it's too embarrassing for their sport.
Well, and there's have you ever seen a Scandinavian try to throw a baseball?
No.
It's embarrassing. It's terrible. They don't
That's
do
awesome.
it.
And I love that you brought up the lack of symmetry. I mean, however you want to split it, because most likely if you'd actually measure sides of your body, you probably are not symmetrical. And then also in strength, you're not symmetrical. And I see this a lot with athletes who sometimes I ask for a squat video. If I'm starting to notice something, maybe a lack of symmetry in their strength, is I'll ask for a video from directly behind. And they're like, why do you care about that? You can't see, my hip crease. Or I'm like, I don't really care about any of that. I want to see what the barbell's doing. And you'll see it. The barbell like is like heavy, like really low on the left side, really high on the right side. And I mean, maybe not super aggressive, but you can see it. And you're like, you start pointing these things out to people and you're like, hey, maybe we should try some single leg movements or pistols or something to help you, well, depending on the athlete, but to help you gain a little bit more unilateral strength. So what do you kind of recommend for people who are maybe too one-dimensional, or lacking, have some sort of big gap?
Well, first of all, I think that you hit the nail on the head with assessing the movement, right? So too often what happens is, let's say there's not even anything going on, right? Like what you caught is what we call a leading indicator. So a leading indicator would be just a movement flaw that we know is probably going to lead to some sort of tissue breakdown with repetition or heavy load, that people just perceive as, this knee pain came out of nowhere. Well, our body just doesn't give itself tendinitis. Like we do that to ourselves in many cases via movement inefficiencies. So, when we look at movement, we have to assess it like you're talking about in multiple directions. Then the other big thing is we want to know, okay, what's your sport background? Like I see a lot of people that get into CrossFit that were baseball players. And, they want to have this extremely symmetrical shoulder internal rotation, side to side, because they know it's going to help them keep the bar closer as they go through pulling the bar to the catch position overhead. But if you've been throwing a ball, thousands of reps from the time you were 6 until the time you were 18 or 22 or whatever it is, the likelihood of you having true symmetry side to side in your range of motion is very low. And even if we did crank on that thing to try to improve it to the same side to side, we may do more harm for you than good, because you have all these neurologic patterns of control of that joint in these specific ranges. So I think the big thing to ask at the beginning is, what's the intent? Why are we doing this? And then from there, breaking out exactly where their limitations are. Is it a motor control problem? Is it a mobility problem? Maybe it's a combination of both, and try to build as much symmetry as we can to get people usually within about 90%. And this has to be isolated. This is sort of the frustrating part for people too. It's like, look, you can't do, 7 minutes of burpees and then work on single leg control. Like, it's just not how it works. It has to be an accessory format of some kind, because when your body is going through these high intensity stimuluses, which can get you very fit, your brain perceives this as no different than if you were in a fight or running away from an animal. And it's a high intensity stimulus. It doesn't know any different. So it upregulates gross motor patterns. It downregulates fine motor skills. So your ability to pay attention to how much you're shifting, or, to really do like a perfect Pallof press, it deteriorates that. But it allows you to recruit more muscle fibers. So like if you were to be attacked by an animal, you'd just be like, push away, push away, push away. It wouldn't be, this like really fine motor, okay, poke them in the tear duct. It's like not how people work. It's just like, oh, get this thing off me. And then you upregulate recruiting more muscles, but not necessarily fine motor skills. So when we look at this in the gym, if we're trying to gain motor control to create symmetry, it's something that has to be programmed in a way where we can focus and not necessarily be so exhausted that we're just trying to finish.
And, that's actually a big question I get in the programming world is session order. How
Yeah.
things should how things should be truncated, and the answer is normally in the programming world dose response. You're not going to, like you said, you're not going to have someone do whatever, like glycolytic intervals, the most painful type of interval that you can do for 10 rounds, to where you're just in absolute agony, pain, don't know why it's taking you 30 minutes to recover. And then you're like, okay, now let's do our fine motor skills mobility.
Yeah.
Like and that's I think that's a problem with a lot of people's programming right now, is they maybe where they're throwing it in. So how would you recommend, people trying to throw in more, as opposed to fixing something like prehabilitation work, like mobility and
Yeah.
stability type stuff, where in their programming, if it's before, after, or just standalone by itself, how would you recommend that be done?
Well, I think there's different ways to go about it, right? Like there's not necessarily one like better way. When we program for people, we'll typically, like, we know what they like to do is the fun stuff. They like to like get stronger, lift heavy weights. They like to do Metcon. Sometimes not. Sometimes people don't like to do that, but like that's the stuff that, we're going to prioritize that just from a fitness goal standpoint. So I typically will have some sort of elongated warm up that tries to incorporate that stuff in it, or we try to knock it out of the way before, because the other problem with athletes, or really just people in general, is they're busy, and if you give them what they want first, then the likelihood of them actually doing the things that you want them to do at the end is very low. They'll sit around, they'll look at women on Instagram, they'll talk to their friends, they'll just do other things versus, hey, all right, before we get into this, we've got to do, these things. So I'll structure it that way. I also like this concept of performance-based physical therapy, which is actually, to my knowledge, developed by Kelly Starrett. The only person I've ever seen initially start kind of programming stuff this way. And a lot of the rehab stuff that we do actually turns into this. And it's where we basically try to challenge the respiratory system in many ways, through facilitating breath work through the nose only. And what's nice about that is it's self-regulating in terms of you can't move quite as fast or as long on something that we can track. So in particular, if we can take something that we can see some objective measure, for instance, the assault bike or the echo bike or a rower, we can see watt output. So like, let's say we want you to hold 200 watts for as long as you can, only breathing through your nose. Now, as soon as you drop, we know that you're not able to sustain that same load. Then we're going to move on to something else that's going to be trunk control dominant. So in let's say we're training for somebody's back or whatever, but usually we'll do some sort of like multi-directional trunk control work. So let's say we have you row for however long that is, breathing just through your nose. Then we'll go straight to something that's more like isolatory control work, like a Pallof press, or maybe an overhead Pallof press. Or maybe we do some sort of dead bug variation where we want you to then now have to control your breathing and control your spine at the same time, which is where we see most of these back injuries that occur, or hip injuries or shoulder injuries. When people are breathing heavy, they just totally lose control of their spine, and they're just whipping their body around versus having that stable chassis and then being able to use the primary engines of their shoulders and their hips. So we'll use this in different variations where we basically stack rounds with recovery in between. And that right there is a really good warm up for people as well. So we can do maybe 2-3 rounds of that, and then we can roll into a number of different things because we've got them breathing heavy, we've got their core temperature elevated, we got them their connective tissue is warmed up and is moving better. So we'll actually lump that in at the beginning before we let them do some of the things they really want to do.
And that's something I've noticed in our own programming is we always put we call it the daily, stuff like reverse hypers and, stuff for the hamstrings and core and stuff. We put at the end.
Yeah.
And the percentage of our athletes who will skip it, they'll do all the other stuff that makes them stronger and faster and all that stuff. But the percentage of our athletes who skip it is higher than I would like for it to be. So I want to go back to the nasal breathing. Yeah. So what would be the big purpose behind doing something like that?
So nasal breathing forces you to pull air into, something that has a smaller diameter. You can't get as much air in through your nose as you can through your mouth. So in order to do that, you actually have to be much more active with your diaphragm than you do when you breathe through your mouth. So when we do that, it gives us an opportunity to cause people to use their diaphragm more, which the nice thing with that is the diaphragm is both a respiratory muscle as well as a stability muscle. It's the second biggest muscle in your body. I think this is where people forget the fact that the diaphragm is huge. Literally, the glutes are the only muscles that are bigger in our body. It's this huge muscle that you can't see. I think that's the other reason why we neglect to really think about it. So for us to force people to use their diaphragm allows us to get better respiratory exchange by using that muscle versus when we breathe with our mouth in a stress breathing pattern. Usually it's elevation of the rib cage. So we'll kind of breathe with our neck as our shoulders raise, and we'll pull with our SCM, which are these big, muscles in the front of your neck. And if you ever see somebody who has this like really overdeveloped neck and they look like their traps are, really strong, and they're a desk worker and they're just like not strong anywhere else, it's because they're just breathing all day long, 20,000 times a day through their neck. And they're probably in significant pain all the time. And people live here and all the time with their head forward, necks tight, traps are as hard as can be. And they're just not using their diaphragm to breathe, really. They're just doing a stress breathing pattern. So when we force somebody to use their diaphragm, we also are engaging a muscle that connects to 4 vertebrae in our back and is a primary stabilizer of the actual spine between the thoracic spine and the lumbar spine. And that is usually where we see people break down with barbell-based movements from the ground. So the hinge point tends to be the upper lumbar, lower thoracic. So if we can get better engagement there, we typically have better control of positions under the bar or with kettlebell work because they're better at utilizing that muscle group.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard was perhaps the best explanation on why you should do or incorporate nasal breathing. Like there's a lot of call it hype right now. It's kind of trending breathing. But when I ask people about why they're doing breath work or whatever, they can never give me a great answer. And I wasn't expecting you to not give me a great answer, but I think just your level of knowledge from being a physical therapist and everyone you've worked with, provided such great information. I've asked because it's just, people, Kelly Starrett's putting information out about it. Brian McKenzie, Wim Hof, just breathing in general, right, is becoming really popular. And I feel like some people are just doing it and they don't know why. And so if anyone ever wants to know why you should be doing it, Danny just gave the best answer I've ever heard on why you should be doing things like nasal breathing in your warm up or in your training. That's pretty awesome, dude.
Well, and the other thing too, if you're interested in this topic, like there are some really good references out there. The best and most underrated person, in my opinion, that's talking about this stuff is a guy named Rob Wilson out of Virginia Beach. And he actually teaches for Brian McKenzie's group. He developed actually their breathing course called The Art of Breathing. And he is on another level with this. In fact, the reason that I even know a sliver of what Rob knows is because he's a buddy of mine. We used to teach a lot together. And, I've been to 2 of his courses that I've seen now the evolution of that. And they're even doing some really cool stuff in university or at Stanford University, looking at anxiety control work with different down regulatory breath patterns. And a lot of it is, it's one of the few ways that we can tap into our own internal system to where we can affect our stress output. When your kids are upset, one of the best things to do is just tell them to like, take a big breath, breathe in, pause, let it out, do that twice, and then tell me what's wrong. And for the most part, most adults could benefit from this too. And they just,
oh yeah,
and it's true. Even looking at something that's called a 4-7-8 breathing pattern. There's some studies where they've shown 2 cycles of a 4-7-8 breathing pattern. So 4 seconds in, breathing through the nose, pause for 7 seconds, exhale for 8, do that twice. Will cut your cortisol levels or stress hormone levels down by 50%.
Wow.
It's huge. It's huge. And it's, and we have all these people that are taking antidepressants and all this just stupid ass shit that plenty of people make a lot of money on, and then they get very dependent on, when if they just understood how to tap into their own system to affect their emotions and their stress levels and their anxiety, much of that can be solved with breathing correctly.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. And I'm going to have to check out Rob Wilson, maybe even get him on the podcast. I think,
oh man, he'd be great.
There's so much like I started box breathing several years ago after I did, hung out with Mark Divine for a few days. I started doing box breathing, and it's just been such a beneficial tool. Like I've tried, I bounce around, like I did Wim Hof for a while, and that was good. But to be honest, Wim Hof was just taking me too much time to go through the full 40 breaths and everything. But the basic, the way he taught it, and the simple ways close to 4-7-8 is just, it was 5-5-5-5, so 5 in, 5 hold, 5 out, 5 hold, can just completely change your day. If you're like stressed out, or you have something going on, or you just need to relax and focus, like it's really incredible, all the stuff that that breath work can do for you.
Well, I think it's also task-based meditation. If you think about it, like I cannot just sit and try to think of nothing for 10 minutes.
Right.
I can think of very few things I enjoy less than sitting and thinking about nothing.
Yeah.
It's so hard for me, but I can count like that, like no problem, and focus on something like that, or even stretching it out to where it's tens. Like you start to get up around that, 10 in, pause 10, 10 out, pause 10, that starts to get pretty challenging. And box breathing is great, especially if, you set a timer and you start to focus on just this box pattern. For those of you that have struggled with maybe trying to do meditation because everybody tells you to, and they think it's going to change,
right?
Like, yeah, it's great for you. Don't get me wrong, but maybe you struggle with the same thing I did, and having a task like that has helped me a lot.
Yeah, I do think so we asked you got the challenges, fitness challenge, mental toughness challenge, book recommendation. And I think, man, it's gotta be something absurd. Like 70% of my guests, when I asked for mental toughness challenge, have said meditation. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's just, obviously it's very challenging for most everyone, I'm guessing, because it's just what people are saying over and over again. And it can be difficult to feel, especially if you don't practice it. It's basic breathing is a great way to get into it. All right, man. So I want to hear more a little bit about, to be honest, what we're doing in other areas of the world, of the internet. You have a lot of other stuff going on with your podcast. I'm calling it new, even though we discussed at the beginning that it's not that new. So I just know that there are a lot of physical therapists in our community. So I'd love to introduce them to what you're doing and what you're focused on.
Yeah. So, it's an evolution of how we started, I guess, in a lot of ways. We when I say we, I really mean me, I guess. I don't know why I keep saying we, but eventually it is we. My wife ended up coming on to help me out with some of the business stuff, who's a just, amazing resource, because she used to run nonprofits, and she has a lot of kind of like organizational systemization background with things. So when I got out, I decided I wanted to start a practice where I didn't actually take insurance, which is sort of a weird, I guess, way to start.
What made you want to do that?
I didn't want to have to work with multiple people per hour. So in most cases, if you want to be a profitable business, you have to work with 2, maybe 3 people per hour in order to have profit margins that are going to keep the lights on in a physical therapy practice. So, if insurance is telling me they're going to reimburse me $75 a visit, and I know I need to have $150 an hour in order to pay my front desk, pay the person who has to fight with the insurance company to get me paid, and then have a salary and all the overhead associated with that. That means I have to see 2 people an hour. And that's kind of like you going to a CPA with somebody else and trying to get him to do both your taxes and answer all your questions at the same time. It just doesn't work as well. And we can't get as good of outcomes as if then when we take one person, we focus on them, and we customize everything to them. Then we get these accelerated outcomes, in particular with people that have struggled for years and sometimes decades to not have a a solution to their musculoskeletal problems. So that was in June of 2014. I had really no intentions of ever growing our practice past myself. I thought that what would happen was I would just try to get busy, maybe see 15 people a week, teach for MobilityWOD. At the time, I was teaching like 25, 30 times a month, or 25, 30 times a year. So I was on the road a lot, and which was super cool because I got to go a lot of cool places and work with a lot of cool people. But that also wears you down quite a bit too. The travel starts to get difficult on your family and your health. And so as we started to get busier and busier in my practice, we realized, man, maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing, and we should change the amount of time that I'm spending teaching and move some of that over to our business. And that was about 2 years ago when we decided to really focus on athletes' potential. And since then, we've grown now to significantly bigger standalone location. We just brought our 4th physical therapist on, and we're just trying to help as many people as we possibly can in the city of Atlanta, as well as be able to employ people that are in our profession. And anybody that's a physical therapist listening to this will appreciate this. We want our employees to have jobs that they love going to, where they don't feel burnt out, where they can see 6, 7 patients in a day versus 20 to 30 and get paid really well. And we've kind of, I think, cracked the code on how to do that. And in the process, we've had to get really good at other things. Like you and I have worked together to work on marketing, and I just have had to learn a lot of things along the way that I didn't learn in school, and reinvest in my own business education. And because of that, we've really been able to sustain these other providers and grow our business along the way, and have a super cool culture where, we have a business where we send, Bitmojis to each other. You ever seen Bitmojis? You know what I'm talking about? It's like the little avatar representation of you.
Yeah.
It'll be that of like one of us sitting on the toilet, like reading a newspaper, and that's on our Slack channel. And we're doing that to each. So like, I think you can tell, how fun your company is to work with, or like the culture, based on like how much you can get away with in terms of like having fun with each other, and it's still being like, it's still being cool. So it's just fun to see our business have been able to grow to where it is now.
That's really awesome, man. And that I want to talk to you about this side of, because I've gotten to know you pretty well over the last couple of years, and it's been great. But one thing I really like to highlight in these podcasts is you are a phenomenal physical therapist who knows a lot, but there's so much more to it, in being an entrepreneur and juggling everything that you have to. I feel like for me to best do these episodes, these podcasts, is to really uncover that other side. So I would love to know kind of one of your, say, biggest takeaways, and I'm maybe putting a lot on you right there, in being an entrepreneur. Like, what is maybe a hurdle you've gotten over mentally that you probably maybe couldn't imagine being that type of person when you were active duty military or before, whatever, what's a big thing you've overcome or learned?
Well, I think the one thing that I've come to realize, and I think my answer will change in 4 or 5 more years, right? I mean, I hope it does, because that means I've just, I've continued to progress and grow. But I feel like if you decide to become an entrepreneur and do your own thing, and take a chance on yourself, you have to understand that whatever business venture that you go into is basically going to exaggerate your personality, both positively and negatively. So I look at entrepreneurship as it's basically a huge endeavor into personal development. So my style is sort of jump out of the airplane and build the parachute on the way down, right?
Right.
So I'm very quick to start things. I'm not scared to be turned down by people or fail, or these are positives of my personality. Negatives are I'm not very organized. I do not do a good job necessarily of systemizing things. I really only like to do what I like to do. And these are things that will show up in my business. If I do not hire the right people to come in place to help facilitate those things I'm not very good at, or realize what those flaws are and try to improve those. And I think that to some degree you have to do both. And also it's super, super difficult to take a step back and be like, man, I suck at this. You know, like nobody likes to hear that.
Right.
But I mean, I feel that stuff all the time, man. Like, and it's one thing for me that I've learned is I'm very quick to, I'm very hard on myself. And because of that, I take it very personally. You know, like I like what I'm doing. I think we can help people. I think that I have the right intentions for people. I try to work with them. And when I don't get the response that I feel like I should, you know, it's very easy to think like, oh, okay, is this something that I did wrong or whatever? And really, it's not the case. Like some people just don't want to work with you. Some people are just jackasses. Some people just, you know, don't see it the same way. And being able to like not let that affect your day, that stuff. And I think that's one of the things that stops people from starting anything, because they're very scared of being turned down or failing, you know? And I mean, how many times have you screwed something up?
Quite a few times.
A lot, right?
Yeah.
And like, how much different does your business look now than it did, you know, 5 years ago?
Oh yeah. I mean, if we went through a list of like all of the, and people don't ever see that stuff either. Like all of the things that I've tried and failed at over the years and having my own business, like people were like, oh yeah, you did this and then this, and now you have a successful business. And it's like, dude, I threw shit at a wall for so many years. None of it worked. Nobody was buying. Nobody cared. You know, and then you start to learn, you know, from having to do all that and go through all that, you start to learn, but it's a very painful process.
Well, not only that, but the hard part is in most cases, you don't know if what you're doing is pushing the needle forward.
Right. That is the hardest part.
I mean, this is the way I feel. Like I felt this way with our brick and mortar business for probably the first year. And then all of a sudden I was like, damn, stuff's starting to click. Like this is working. Okay, this is exciting. And then it's like scale and systemize and grow. And then to the point where now, you know, I'm really only there maybe 10 hours a week, just seeing patients. And then the rest of the time we're doing some stuff to help facilitate the business. But we've got people in place to where, you know, it's very self-sustaining, which is great. Now, you know, for the last maybe 9 months, you know, we've really been focusing on the digital side of our business, which is more about helping people in our space be able to achieve the same things that we were able to or have been able to in the brick and mortar realm. So how do you start one of these practices? You know, how do you get more patients? How do you improve your sales? Like all this stuff. And, you know, you know, this is where my office is. I've got a big old whiteboard over here, and I can't tell you how many times I've drawn stuff up here, and I'm like, okay, this is what is next. And like, this is the strategy of this. And then it takes you all this time to like build something out, and then you test it, and then it doesn't work, or it doesn't work like you thought. And you're like, this is going to kill it. This is going to be amazing. We're going to get like so many people to be able to help them. And then nothing. And then you're just sort of like sitting there, and nobody has any idea how much time you spent on this or what you've done. And you really literally are in no different place than where you were before. It's like running on a treadmill sometimes. It really is.
No, I fully agree with you. I think I've expressed that to my wife primarily over the years, is like, yeah, like I'm doing things each and every single day. I don't know if any of it's gonna, like you said, work or move and you do learn more of like what's actually important, what actually moves the needle over time. But especially at the beginning, you're like, man, I hope that entire 10 hours that I work today is gonna do something later on.
Oh, dude, that's so accurate, because, you know, I'm in my unfinished garage. It looks like, you know, it's an unfinished garage or basement. I'm sorry. So it's pretty Spartan, which is kind of nice. Right? Keeps me humble to work down here. But the thing is, you're right. You know, and there's nobody it's telling you like this is the absolute next step, because there's so many variables, and it's the beauty of entrepreneurship. Like you can be creative, you can do something that no one's ever done before. You can model something that's worked and make it better. You can do all kinds of stuff, but man, you can be wrong a lot. And
Right.
you pay for it either with your time or your money. And even, when you seek out help, like we've worked together on this stuff, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it helps push the needle forward, but there's just so many things that you have to understand. And in many cases, there is no right answer. The answer is become a good detective, try stuff, see what's working, make those things better, test it, retest it again, make those things better, and then do that over and over and over again. And I'm not quite sure if that ever stops.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I don't think that it ever, like, especially if you want to continue. I think you could figure out your business, like, at a certain level really well, and you could probably just, like, maintain that. But if you want to keep growing and keep doing new things, no, I don't think there's ever, like, yes, this is the next answer, this is the next step. I think you're always going to have some sort of, like, learning curve, unfortunately.
Well, then you get into the question of, even if you did, okay, so like, let's say, all right, I pretty much have our brick and mortar business on autopilot. But now I'm working on this digital business, which is a lot of fun and also frustrating sometimes, but really do feel like we have an opportunity to help my profession. Like I'm more interested in what kind of mark can I leave on the profession of physical therapy than how many practices I can grow athletes' potential to. That interests me significantly more. But let's say, I get to the point where you're talking like multiple 7-figure online business, and I can take myself out of it and just go live in Belize for the rest of my life and never have to worry about money ever again. That would last for me for about 5 days. And then I would get so frustrated with not having something to work towards that I would inherently find myself in the same place. So in some cases, I wonder if this idea of being an entrepreneur is some sort of like weird disease that we don't even realize that we have. And it's just something we have to learn how to control.
Yeah, or live with. No, I mean, there are points. I mean, that's happened to me in business over and over again. It's like, well, if I just got to this point, that'd be it. Like, it happened to me when I was in fitness too early on. Like because I was in the more bodybuilding space. I was a smaller guy, just wanted to get big, and so I was like, I started lifting when I was 139 pounds, and so I was like, all right, 150. That's the money. And then it was 170, 170 pounds. I would be jacked. 180 pounds, and then I ended up 205 pounds, and then finally came to the realization. I was like, is this how people end up being like those 275-pound bodybuilders who can't wipe their own butt? I'm like, probably. I should probably like go a different direction. But the same thing happens in business, man. It's like, we're at points now where I never thought that we would be previously, and I'm like still pushing. Like, let's scale, let's do more things. And it's like, well, you said if you ever got here, you would be perfectly happy. It's like,
right.
You have to stop and like appreciate things. And but no, I don't. There's never full satisfaction, which is unfortunate.
And I had it posed to me one time. There's certain people that are very like past biased, right? So they're like your high school friends that always want to talk about like that one time that you won the football game, whatever.
Right.
That's not me. There's certain people that are very present biased, and they're very in the moment. They're very aware. They're very present. I think that's rare. There's not a lot of people that are like that, and plenty of people would love to be more like that. And then there's people like us that are usually very future biased, and we sort of have like this this natural inclination to want to perceive things that are possible and have a vision for what that is, which is one of the reasons why we can do things in business and will attract people that are not like that they see that and are like, this is kind of crazy. This guy knows exactly what he wants in X amount of years, and this is what it's going to take to get there, and he's obsessed with it. And that is something that's, I think, is a positive as well as potentially a negative. And for me, like, I have to be very aware of that because I have 2 kids. You have 2 kids. My kids are here now. They're the age that they are now. They do things that are amazing every day, and if you're so focused on the next goal, and you forget the fact that, like, hey, yeah, let me take a step back and think of all the things that we've been able to do, man. If you and I had stayed in the military, we know where we would be. We know what our
Right.
rank would be. We know what our job would be. We know exactly what we'd be, oh, cool. I got, 7 years left and then I can retire. Cool.
Right.
And then I get out. Then what? Right. And so we didn't do that. We took a chance on ourselves. And because of that, we've been able to put ourselves in a position where, we say what our income is going to be. It can be whatever we decide to work towards and however successful we can be. We have an opportunity to create generational financial change for our family. And no one ever did that by taking the safe route, which is typically being employed by somebody else. And it's not about money either. It's about not squandering an opportunity to use your skill set, not looking back and wondering like, what could have I have done? And I don't want to do that. And you also don't want to burn your family down in the process by being a jackass that stays down in your unfinished basement on a whiteboard all the time.
Yeah, dude, I love it. I love it, man. So let's get to the quick fire questions of the show. And I really appreciate you sharing all that. I think that we're very similarly minded in the entrepreneurship space. It's crazy. I mean, what's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Oh man, there's a workout that I did. I don't know if this is a workout. I once got voluntold to have to do this challenge out in Hawaii. It was called the Gimlet Challenge, which was a battalion. It was 1-2-1, the gimlets. Gimlet apparently is a stick. I don't even know what it does, but it's a stick. And during this challenge, part of it was a ruck march. I forget how far we went. We got lost. The group I was with got lost, and we ended up going significantly further. So it ended up turning out to be like 20 miles. Not knowing either, by the way, I just show up early one morning and they told me to clear my schedule. And that was probably worse than anything because I was just like, I had no idea it was going to end. And I felt like crap for the next week.
That sounds pretty awful. Now, I do know you might change your answer to that question after this 3 hours of hill runs in Connecticut.
Yeah, true. I agree. I just think it's a different group of people that are probably going to be there. So I don't know. Yeah, awesome. But that was pretty rough. It was more the unknown. I think that was the tough
That sounds
part.
brutal. Just showing up, not knowing you're going to do something, and then it being 20 miles or whatever.
It's funny. Like this group, I just had my office in their community building. It was next to where the laundry area was, and then they had this area that had like a foosball table, and in the middle was an office where my where my office was. I had like a table in there, and I had some like kettlebells. And so these guys, I don't think they really even knew that I wasn't attached to their battalion. I was part of the support battalion. It's just that's where my office was. So they would just like think I had to do all this stuff with them. they always come by. They're like, "Hey, we got combatives." I'm like, "Okay, where is it?" They're like, "Well, it's over here. Like we do this every Wednesday." And so I just sort of got adopted by this battalion.
That's awesome, dude. Hey, come on.
Yeah, come on,
we're doing something cool today.
Like, what the hell? I'm a PT.
I mean, in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Waking up early every morning.
Yeah, I can agree with that one, especially when you're tired.
Even if you don't want to.
That's what does it, right? Yeah.
Every morning, wake up early.
All right, if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Kettlebell.
Got it, man. All right, the question of the show, what is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? This is 100% open-ended.
Read books.
Yeah, always be learning. I think that's the game changer.
Period. I mean, I don't get it. Or don't even read books, but get an Audible account and just listen to books, Yeah. I mean, you could tell people you read and just listen if you're not into reading, I guess. But think about how cheap that is. How many really, really intelligent, successful, people write books that you can learn from and expose yourself to that, it's the easiest way to, in my opinion, it's the easiest way to progress.
Yeah, it's the easiest and cheapest relative to all the other things that you could do to improve yourself. And totally. I still stumble across the occasional person who's like proud that they haven't read a book since high school. Like they announce it. I'm like, dude, I don't know if I'd tell too many people that.
Yeah.
But I do run into that person from time to time, and
I'm
I'm always surprised that they're like happy about it.
Well, I think the only other thing that I would possibly say for that is travel. But and travel is expensive, and not everybody has the opportunity to do that. But if you do, just like, the exposure to other cultures, sometimes like putting yourself in a position where you're the minority and see how that feels. Like see how other people view problems. I was even some place like Australia. I got a chance to teach down there, and it was just so interesting to see their like the cultural differences and uh, the way their families interact slightly differently. And like there's this like really robust pub culture. I went to a meat raffle down there. I didn't even know what that was. It's like how they get people in the pubs to play the slot machines, and then they raffle off a tray of meat, lamb or whatever, and then you go home and you barbecue it on a weekend. And it's just like little things like that. Like I don't know. You see different parts of the world and different ways people interact is that's amazing. But not everybody, like I said, has financial capabilities or the opportunities to be able to travel and see other places as much as maybe I have been luckily through MobilityWOD.
Awesome, man. So you are doing a lot of stuff online and in person now. What's the best place for people to go to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, the best place is probably just drdannymatta.com. So it's drdannymatta.com. Or I'm pretty active only on one social media channel, which is Instagram. And that's Danny Matta PT, like physical therapy. That's the handle there. So yeah, reach out to me, whatever questions you have, whether it be PT stuff or business stuff. I'm down to help with whatever you got.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate your time and thanks for being on the Better Humanology podcast.
No problem, man. Thank you so much for having me.